everyone, I'm Bonita from Pennies to Dollars, and today we are going to talk about Depression era meals. As you know, I was raised from Depression era parents, so many of the things that I grew up eating were the things that they grew up knowing how to make and how to get by on, because people didn't really learn how to make new things. They just repeated the recipes that they knew back then, that they knew were frugal and they knew were filling. And so we're going to get started, and I do have 2 or 3 recipes that I thought I might share that I thought were interesting. The first one is a chili recipe from my mother, and it actually calls for half of a cup of grape nuts to go in the chili along with everything else, probably to make it stretch, because you know how grape nuts will expand. So I thought that was interesting. This other one is called Party Sloppy Joes, which reminds me of the things that I've heard about when people talk about garbage plates from the Depression era that I guess were from New York where they originated. But this is something that I would not make. A half a pound of ground beef, a half a pound of frankfurters or hot dogs sliced up, 3/4 of a cup of barbecue sauce, onions, pickle relish, and Velveeta. And you mix this all together and put it on a bun. That sounds terrible, doesn't it? And then there was also a Jiffy Super Skillet that called for 1 tablespoon of oleo, which back in the day they called margarine oleo, onion, a sour cream sauce mix packet, which I've never heard of that, milk, potatoes, and a can of that potted meat, and a cup of cheese. And then that was mixed together. So some of these things, as we're thinking about them now, they kind of sound like slop. They kind of sound like something we wouldn't want to eat because we're not used to that. We're used to so many things that are so much nicer, so much more appetizing, so many choices. But back then, they looked at what they could afford and what they could make out of the ingredients that they had. And you have to remember, my dad was born in 29, my mom was born in 31. This was before food stamps, which were 1939, before chocolate chips, 1930, before Spam, 1937, before Betty Crocker, 1936, before Ritz Crackers, 1934, and before Fritos, 1932. So many of these things that originated around the time they were born would have been newer things that my grandparents wouldn't have had, and so my parents wouldn't have learned about and wouldn't have had also. Many of the things that we ate were things like baked apples. That was very popular back then, and I can't say that I'm a fan of that now, but no crust, no topping, just baked apples with your sugar and your cinnamon. Some of my favorites at Christmas time was mincemeat pie. You don't hear about that anymore. And my dad's favorite was raisin pie, and you certainly don't hear about that anymore either. Mom would also make a cornstarch pudding, and she would make tapioca quite a bit, of which I was not a fan. We saved our grease, of course, and cooked with that. We always had a can on the stove of grease that we saved and reused, and I still do that today. Dad's favorite growing up was cornmeal mush for breakfast that was fried. We grew up with a lot of gravy on toast and hamburger gravy on like biscuits or on mashed potatoes. That was a very normal, common thing that we would have back then. Open-faced sandwiches were also very popular with the bread, the meat, and the gravy. Again, I was never a fan of that. I didn't like my bread soggy, but that never seemed to bother my dad because he would take yolky eggs and mix up his toast in there and then just eat it in a big mixed up blob on his plate. He also liked eating milk over crackers, and my oldest brother also loved milk over saltine crackers. That was never something that I liked, but they both thought it was a treat and would eat it before they went to bed like somebody would a bowl of cereal. We ate bananas sliced up in milk. We ate cornbread with syrup and rice with milk and sugar and cinnamon, and that was something that we would eat either in the evening or for breakfast. Fried bologna sandwiches were a hit, and also mayonnaise and cheese sandwiches. And then we had lots of Jell-O. Jell-O was cheap. Mom made Jell-O quite a bit, and we always had Jell-O. Powdered milk was a staple. Cornmeal was a staple. Some of those things we don't keep around as much anymore, but we used a lot of that in cooking when I was younger. And when we had spaghetti, the sauce was mixed in the noodles. Now we put like noodles on the plate and pile our sauce on top, but when you mix it in the noodles, it went a lot farther and you didn't need as much sauce. And it wasn't always as flavorful that way, but that's the way we grew up, and you didn't use as much sauce when it was all mixed together. Also, we had homemade noodles a lot, which was basically flour, eggs, milk, things you had on the farm. Also was very frugal to make, and that was a staple at our holidays always, and we had that over mashed potatoes instead of gravy. Bread pudding was one of my dad's favorites. You could use up your old dried bread and put it in a custard type mixture, which used a lot of egg and milk again from the farm, and then bake that. And Dad loved bread pudding. We grew up with a lot of rabbit and pheasant, a lot of deer and fish. Whatever Dad could catch would be a lot of the things that we would end up having to eat. These are some of the things that we grew up eating. And like I said, many of them don't sound too appetizing now, but I just want to encourage you that if they could get through this, if they could find ways to be creative with their food, we can too. We can find ways to be creative. Sometimes we just get that mental block, I think, that we don't know what to do, we don't know what to try. Maybe some of us aren't real creative with cooking or haven't cooked a lot, and now we're having to cook. So let your brain just kind of go wild. Put things together that you like, ingredients that you like, maybe spices that you like, and more times than not, it will turn out just fine, and it will be something that maybe you'll even want to write down and make it again for your family. I have been sharing some struggle meals and some homemade recipes on my frugal recipe playlist. So if you're interested in that, please follow that and check out some of the recipes that I share. Some of them are very, very cheap, very filling, and things that I fed my kids when I had a whole house full and I needed to make ends meet. And again, if you are interested, I have a 50 Frugal Recipes When Living on a Budget book on Amazon. And if you're interested, the description box will have a link to that. So thank you again. I hope you've enjoyed this reminiscing of Depression era foods. And I hope to hear from you in the comments of any that you're aware of or you grew up eating that I missed. You have a great day, and thanks again for watching.